In the dim and distant haze of automotive history, there were two great Italian racing teams. I'm talking now about a time when Enzo Ferrari didn't even know what a slide rule was. About a time when the first Lamborghini wasn't even so much a twinkle in its designer's biro. I'm talking about Alfa Romeo, and specifically, Maserati. Right up until the end of the 1950s, Maserati were the force to be reckoned with, especially when their cars like this glorious 250F were being driven by yesteryear's Nigel Mansell, old Sterling Moss himself. But then as the 60s dawned, Maserati began to abandon its racing program and concentrate instead on road cars. Naturally enough, the cars were an instant success. But of course, they couldn't have been much else when you consider they combined drop-dead looks like these with what at the time was just about the best badge in the business. This object lesson in kinetic art is the Sebring, a glorious 2+2 coupe with a 235 brake horsepower, 3.5 litre, 6-cylinder motor. Now, if people will pay £22 million for a bad painting of some sunflowers, then this should really be worth 220 million. It was, is, and always will be one of the definitive front-engined, rear-drive Italian masterpieces. In the 100 or so years of automotive design, the zenith was very probably reached at some point in the 60s. If you think about it, there was the Lamborghini Miura, the Ferrari Daytona, the E-Type Jaguar, and of course, this. The problem for Maserati, of course, was how on earth do you improve on it? Well, they went to Frua, who gave them the Mistral here. Now, Frua was better known in England for his work with the AC428, and there's certainly elements of that car in this. Mind you, there's also elements of the Corvette, a little bit of Jensen, a little bit of Aston Martin here and there, and yet somehow it's all very Italian. You know, there used to be a photograph of this in an old Ladybird book of cars I had. I think I could say Maserati before I could say mummy. Day, it was no slouch. With 255 brake horsepower on tap from the twin-spark 4-litre engine, it could get from 0 to 60 in less than 7 seconds. And at a place like Thruxton, could crack 150 miles an hour. The more I drive old cars like this, the more I wish I'd been old enough in the 60s to have enjoyed them when they were new. Mind you, I probably would have been a hippie and gone in for yogic flying rather than driving. I know it's not much faster than a modern-day hot hatchback and it handles like a penguin, but it's so much more involving. You have to put so much more effort in to get the maximum out. If you ever get the chance to drive a car like this down a country road, grab it with both hands and just do not let go. With the 6-cylinder motor screaming away up front and that historic old Trident badge slashing its way through the countryside, this is a taste of nostalgia gone mad. But when the car was new, nostalgia wasn't part of the deal. Competition was, and by 1968, Maserati was in trouble. The receivers had been round once before in 1958, and just 1 decade on, it looked like the men in suits would be back. It was Citroën of all people who came to the rescue, and despite falling sales, some violent strikes and a hopeless deal with Fiat, they managed to introduce a whole range of new models, one of which was that, the stunning Khamsin. Like so many previous Maseratis, this 5-litre V8 monster was named after a wind, which was apt because that's what it went like. In its day, the Khamsin was an easy match for the Porsche 928 and the Ferrari 400. You could bowl along in the thing at 160 miles an hour. But good though the Khamsin was in 1975, with the oil crisis in full swing, Citroën gave up and sold its Italian problem child to Alessandro Di Tommaso. Come to think of it, the only person who has never owned Maserati is my mother. Mind you, even she would have made a better job of running it in the 1980s. The problem was, by then, the Maserati name meant virtually nothing. I mean, your Thatcherite yuppie was not going to buy a Maserati just because 30 years earlier they used to win some races. In the same way that he was hardly likely to eschew Peugeot because of the mess William the Conqueror made of southern England in 1066. This image problem wouldn't have been so bad if the car of the time had been any good. But the Maserati, or should I say Gazerati Biturbo, looked like a Ford Cortina, went rusty if Ian McGaskill even so much as mentioned rain, it was unreliable, and it wasn't very nice to drive. The only reason this thing growled was because it was a dog. Unbelievably, Maserati managed to survive. And now in the 90s they're back with yet another new sponsor, this time Fiat, and a new range of cars. Now this is the newest of the lot, the 222 4-valve. And I'll admit, it looks just like a biturbo. But we should not judge a book by its cover.
Tower to Oscar 01, you are clear for takeoff.
This is like a BMW 3 Series that's been at the anabolic steroids. Okay, so it might look like a tarted up Capri, and these days a BMW keyring probably cuts more ice at a drinks party, but it is great fun. The interior especially is just plain great. It's the first non-British car I've ever found where the wood and the leather actually look right, and that clock just gives you a taste of history. And don't bother looking for any Italianate build quality problems either, because I just haven't been able to find any. I have to say, this is a very, very nice place to be, even if from time to time, things do get just a little bit hairy. Woo-hoo! The engine room is full to the brim with a 2.8-litre 24-valve V6, which has 2 turbochargers. I'm happy to say the days of fast Mazas are back. The trouble is, of course, that spending £45,000 on a sports saloon that isn't a BMW is rather like spending £2,000 on a watch that isn't a Philippe Patek, or 200 quid on a shirt that isn't from Jermyn Street. You have to say, really, that this is a car for oddballs. But oddballs are interesting people, and this, make no mistake, is a very interesting car.